Black is beautiful. Yes, it is. Black is beautiful.
No justice, no peace. I'm Kalia.
I'm Alana.
And I'm Janelle.
And welcome to DMLK's The Take. This series will address the inequities students face in their education today. We will discuss how to keep our resolution alive by having conversations with key people involved in the implementation, sustainability, and overall success of our resolution. In last week's episode, we spoke with Dwight Jones, the interim superintendent for Denver Public Schools. We discussed his perspective on our resolution, his equity work for students in DPS, and his plans for the future of our resolution as our current leader. I think speaking to him gave me a little bit more hope regarding his commitment to the students in DPS and our resolution that will directly affect those students' education.
It was interesting to hear Mr. Jones explain what qualities the incoming superintendent should have in order to address equity, race, and our resolution. In addition to this, I got to hear a new perspective on the role of the intern superintendent, and we were able to hear what he was responsible for while being the deputy superintendent of equity.
For me, last week's episode definitely gave me some hope for a more equitable future for students in DPS. And so far, I feel like we're on the right track as it relates to our resolution work.
So I'm sure y'all are wondering what's up this week. This is our take on culturally responsive future in DPS. As students, our futures begin with our school education. Every school district is responsible for making our learning experience as culturally responsive as possible, so that we can go into the world knowledgeable about how we deserve to be treated and how we can overcome any adversities we may face. Our guests today play a major role in what was formerly known as the Culturally Responsive Education Department. Effective September 20th, the Curriculum and Instruction Department, C&I, and the Culturally Responsive Education, CRE departments were combined to create one department, the Culturally Sustained Curriculum and Instruction Department.
In today's episode, we will be speaking to Mr. Theo Shaw, the executive director of this new department, Jamie Villarreal-Bassett, the director of Culturally Responsive Education, and Joey Torres, the curriculum specialist of Culturally Responsive Education. Welcome and thank you for joining us on The Take today. Before we get started, we have to remind our listeners about our trigger alert. Janelle, can you please read the trigger alert?
If you are not 110% in support of Black Lives Matter, please dismiss yourself. If you are in any sort of agreement with the systemic oppressions this country has inflicted on minorities, once again, please dismiss yourself. And if you are not willing to give every bit of the power that the people so undeniably deserve, then please dismiss yourself. Because in a few moments, you will witness vast amounts of Black engagement, and if you do not dismiss yourself, then the thoughts, facts, and feelings we are about to share will most definitely dismiss you.
Hello, Mr. Shaw, Ms. Bassett, and Mr. Torres. Thank you so much for coming on here today. And just before we get started, could each of you provide our listeners with some information about yourselves, just like where you're from, your educational career, one quality you bring to this new department, and just what your overall goal is?
Absolutely. I'll kick us off. Thank you for inviting us to be here with you today. It is our pleasure to be with you. My name is Theo Shaw. I'm the Executive Director for Culturally Sustaining Curriculum and Instruction here in Denver Public Schools. I'm originally from Durham, North Carolina. And attended a historical Black college university, North Carolina A&T State University. Go Aggies, Aggies pride. I have been an educator, career success coordinator, dean, AP, and now serving my current role as the executive director. One quality that I bring to our newly merged department is my willingness to learn, adapt, and grow as a leader. I don't come into this position claiming to know all the answers, but I refuse to allow the barriers to racial inequity to prevent us from finding solutions to ensure that each and every one of our students thrives in all facets of their lives.
Hi, I'm Jamie Villarreal-Bassett, and I'm super happy to be here today. And I want to also name that I am in gratitude to you young ladies. I have two kiddos who are in DPS, and because of the path that you are forging for them, they will have a better experience. So I'm in debt to you all, so thank you for what you have provided for yourselves, for other DPS students, including my own kiddos. So I am from Colorado Springs, Colorado, so about an hour here from Denver, and I grew up there, ended up going to college there, went to the Colorado College, got my Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology, and then moved up to Denver, and have been here for 11 or 12 years now, within DPS for almost 10 here coming up in March, and got my Master's of Organizational Leadership from CSU Global Campus, and have been with the CRE team for coming up probably on 3 years now. And I think one thing that I bring to this work is just passion and persistence to know better, do better, be better, and change education for the better for all students, including our Black, Brown, Indigenous students of color. So thrilled to be here with you all today, and in gratitude for you all and the work you've done.
Hi all, thank you so much. My name is Joey Torres, or Torres. He, him, his are my pronouns, and just so pumped and so inspired to be in this time with you all. I know you probably get tons of compliments because you all are star students, but please add me to the list of fans, because just listening to how you introduce yourselves and the way that you've organized, the way that you called it our resolution, like you're just so empowered by this process. And, you know, as a former teacher, it's like a dream to work with students like you all. I'm just really, really impressed with the work that DMLK has done broadly, and to be in the presence of you three today. So thank you. I will start by saying I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, about 6 hours south of here. I went to UNM, University of New Mexico, which is one of the largest Latino serving institutions in the country. I didn't go there because of that. I went there because it was my backyard college. I'm really proud of my education there. Moved up to Denver to teach. I was a high school special ed teacher in Montbello High School and at Florence Crittenton High School, and decided, you know what, like something is not working for me in the school system. My culture wasn't really gelling with the culture of DPS. I thought, you know, I wanted to be involved in community organizing, and I thought it was through public education. I took a step back and said, maybe not. Went off to get a master's, thought I wanted to be a pastor because that's the route I wanted to go, to work with communities. As I started to do that work, I started to see, like, I used to work in schools, and now I've worked in churches, and both of these have mostly white people, and they both serve institutions designed mostly for white people. And I want to know more about that. I didn't understand it, had tons of questions. So went on to get a PhD. I'm in the last 2 months of my PhD journey, about to finish that. And my work really focuses on how institutions have really developed in our country, how they have developed to serve. They were built by and have served for most of the history of our country, white people, right? Most of the public institutions in our country built by white people, designed to serve white people. And what has that done for communities of color, for our BIPOC community members? And so came back to public education, found this job, been super lucky and blessed to have it. And now I get to work in this field and get to kind of tackle these questions I've had for a long time, get to work with folks like you all in trying to answer these questions. So that's kind of my frame, right? That's what I bring to this, is a curiosity. I have tons of questions. I try to think through some of those questions. I love to hear from different kinds of voices and folks, to allow as many different kinds of perspectives to enlighten how I think of the world, enlighten how I want to do work for everybody, try to make all these institutions that, again, were designed for and by white people, to make them more equitable for all those who utilize them. So again, so happy to be here with you all. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank all of you guys so much for coming on here, being our guests, and introducing ourselves. I'm really excited to get into this episode. So we started this journey last October with a trip to the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, directly following our return home and after our second presentation to our entire faculty in December. You, Theo, have been instrumental in the truest form of collaboration between us and the district. You've assisted with curriculum audits and feedback loops, just to name a few. And more importantly, you were part of the development of the No Justice, No Peace resolution. So thank you. We acknowledge that we've made so much ground within one calendar year due to your level of commitment, honesty, and true collaboration. So with that being said, can you share with us how the CSCI department will work to ensure that all actions that are documented in the resolution continue to happen within the timeframes that are outlined?
Yes, thank you for your question and thank you for such a thoughtful question. First, I would be remiss if I just didn't say thank you all for bringing this issue forward to to our district. For too long, countless alumni of DPS have brought forward that the curriculum did not represent them. I can remember accounts of the West High School walkouts back in the 60s from some members on our team who have shared the struggle and the same demands that you've asked from your districts almost 50 plus years ago that still have not played out in our educational system. So thank you all for making sure that you have remained committed and steadfast in holding us to account for the educational equity that you deserve as part of your educational experience. Um, in terms of ensuring that all the actions that are documented in the resolution come alive and are not just words on paper, it starts with me as the leader of this department. One thing that I've committed to just in the past few days as we've kicked off 2021 is every morning starting my day off with reading the No Justice, No Peace resolution to serve as my North Star, to remind me of what are the actions that we have committed to and be able to ensure that we actualize for you and future students that come through the DPS doors. But that alone isn't enough. Um, some of it will require some structural changes. You mentioned one in which we have begun to merge the two departments together, but it also changes how we do business. One of the things that I'm committed to is working with our department to build a vision for what it means to actualize the No Justice, No Peace resolution. Words alone on a piece of paper don't mean enough. We have to come together and vision what it means for our department, for our individual work and actions, to develop a plan so that we can collectively own this work together. Because alone, I can't just tell people to do it. I can, but that just turns into compliance rather than actually owning this work and taking it to the next level. So that's one thing that I'm committed to working with my director and leadership team on, is developing our vision for what this resolution means for us, that is in spirit, that matches the spirit and words that you all have expressed after your visit to the museum, and then be able to progress monitor what our milestones and goals need to be able to actualize it. And the final thing that I think is truly important is that we have to engage in double loop learning. And for me, that means that we just don't create plans in absence of talking to our users, you, our students and educators and community. So while we will be developing these plans, it is critically important that we work alongside you to make sure that we get it right. Because if we're not living the words that you all have expressed on paper, have discussed in your podcast and have expected from us, then it's doing business as usual rather than disrupting the status quo, and ensuring that racial equity is at the forefront of everything that we do in DPS.
I feel like you really hit it on, you really hit it on the head with that. I don't think I can add anything. I just feel like it's really important that like continue with all this work, not just like stopping at signing the resolution and like just putting one foot into all the work. I think we all really appreciate that you're continually doing this work, especially after you put so much effort into like outlining what we need to see done within a certain time frame. And I actually just like to ask, why did the two departments merge in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For myself and Tamra, the move was incredibly important to ensure tight alignment between what was the curriculum and instruction department and the culturally responsive education team in order to realize our collective commitment to racial equity. It's one thing to be in a large organization and we all have our departments and do our work, but it's another thing to sit together, be in the work together, and be able to have line of sight into each other's work so that we are truly interdependent. And for me and for Tamara Acevedo, who is our Deputy Superintendent of Academics, interdependence means that we not only collaborate, because that's what we've done for the duration of my tenure, but that we depend on one another to get the work done and do the very best for our students in DPS. And so moving the culturally responsive education team into the curriculum and instruction team to create the newly formed culturally sustaining curriculum and instruction team means that we are dependent on each other, not just to collaborate when it's easy, but when it's messy and hard. And to ensure that we have line of sight into each other's work so that we can truly advance on the great work that has existed, and also strengthen the work that we need to continue to do to realize what it means to have culturally sustained instruction in front of every student with the range of identities that our students bring into our classrooms.
That's really interesting. I was just wondering if you could also elaborate on what's new with these departments compared to what the CRE and the CI departments did, just operating separately.
Yeah, also a really good question. I would say what's new for our work is just, I think, a deeper sense of collaboration. And that's not to say that collaboration didn't exist beforehand, but to be able to have some intentional focus around how do we engage in professional learning to increase our racial equity lens as leaders in this department. I think it has also allowed for us to really think about structures differently to ensure um, that is one thing to say that this is the work, but is there another thing to make sure that we have the resources and commitment to ensure that people are supported in doing this work? One of the things that I hear oftentimes is that we're a learning organization. And to an extent, that's true. But we also have to ensure that when we make such bold initiatives, such as No Justice, No Peace, that we have to ensure that we disrupt systems of status and inequities. And we are inherently a product of the smog of racism. And so I think what this department has forced us to ensure that we really do some of the deep introspective work to really examine our own biases and look at ourselves and also see how those biases show up and how do we lean on each other to be champions of racial equity. It can't just be the CRE team that is the champions for racial equity. It has to be each and every person who's responsible for curriculum and development. And this is what this new merger will continue to foster within our organization underneath the leadership of Jamie, who leads our culturally responsive education team, that we just don't come in to rubber stamp anyone's work. We want to be there from the very beginning to make sure that we are co-constructing with all of our partners in CSCI, the professional learning, the curriculum, and content so that it truly is culturally responsive and ensures that we have the authentic voices from folks who are engaged in our work, whether they be students, educators, or community members, so that we're not getting feedback after the fact, but as part of the design process.
I could just add on to what Theo just shared and echo that previously, in some ways, CRE was an add-on, a nice to have, and just something that was sitting out there. And with the new change, I think one thing that we are beginning to turn the corner on is CRE is not an add-on anymore. It is the work. It is foundational to all of the other departments and other teams. And so I think that's a really new, exciting turning point for the CSCI department that I'm really looking forward to.
Earlier in our podcast, Janelle mentioned that you have been instrumental since the beginning. So I'm curious, what were your thoughts about us, our ask, and our presentation when you first came to DMLK in December of 2019?
Yeah, that feels like it was so long ago, but just underneath a year. To see each of you present in front of a very what's a nice word to say? Uh, Outspoken group of school leaders. I think that's the best way I can phrase it. Each of the students who were there were fearless, awakened by the experience that you had at the museum back in DC, and determined to ensure that we don't repeat our failures. And as I watched each of you share your perspective, your stories, and the impact that the experience had on you, I wish I was you when I was in high school. Just with how determined and how strong you were in being able to voice the change that you wanted to see. I think too often we often say we have critiques of the system, which is great, but you all came with the critiques and what you expected to see as a result of the shortcomings in our district. Um, I think, honestly, I was a little bit troubled that in 2019, we were still at this current state. it saddened me that our students still didn't know their history. As a former history teacher, I remember my kids coming in on the first day of school and sharing with me that their favorite subjects, in fact, were not history. It was either like math or science. And to hear students who were hungry for their history, but they weren't presented with their history, was troubling and alarming, and really kind of maybe kind of take pause for what have we done as a system to inadvertently damage the identities of our Black, Native American, Latino students with not presenting them with the true and authentic histories of their culture and people that didn't just rest on slavery and always Black tragedy, but not being able to show the accomplishments and triumphs and things that Black people have overcome over the years. And so from that moment forward, I think it's just been this the true power of collaboration and what we can do together when we listen to our students, when we work collaboratively to find solution-oriented approaches to be able to attack problems that you arose for our district and be able to really have that true partnership.
Thank you for your kind words. It really means a lot to each of us. Like I know it does, and we have done a lot of hard work since that presentation, and now with the help of your entire team that's here today, we have a No Justice, No Peace resolution that was passed by the board on October 22nd. So now, can we have each of you tell us your first impressions of the No Justice, No Peace resolution, and what were your initial thoughts?
I'll chime in. My first initial thought was yes, and then followed by like, ugh, that similar to what Theo said, this is the conversation we have to be having in 2019. 50 years ago with the West high school walkouts, some similar demands were made for those students, and we're 50 years later and in the same place, and that that it took this for us to do this. And so very excited for it and just disheartened and then hopeful that in 10 years we can look back to, again, the path that you all have paved and be able to be on the right side of history, and knowing that as we continue to know better, do better, continue to listen to students and communities, that this resolution will be fully realized and fully lived out for students across the district. So initial was really excitement, sadness that this is the place that we're in, but hope for leaders like you all.
I think for me, I started back in DPS at the very end of 2019, so this had already been in action. I will tell you a quick story, which is I left teaching because I didn't feel like the principal at my last school or some of the leadership really knew how to honor all of the voices of the students who are present. And I really, like, I didn't know how to reconcile what it meant to be both a teacher of color working with mostly students of color, all all from various backgrounds, and then have leadership and people who didn't like respond to that. It just didn't make any sense to me. So that's when I mentioned earlier, I just stepped back from teaching thinking maybe this wasn't the field for me. So then when I came back into it in a job that was focused specifically on racial equity, and then hearing about this No Justice, No Peace, resolution that had been passed or was it was in the process of passing and we had to do some work on it. And I'd been thinking about I've been thinking a little bit about like how are we going to do this work? What the heck does this mean? How are we going to do it? And great, right? We have all these questions, and then we have all this like, heck yeah, let's go out and do this. How are we going to make this thing happen? And that's how social change happens, right? Like the reason that action doesn't take place is because people don't know how to do it. And so then it just continues back on itself in this cycle, right? So things don't happen because people don't know how to make the change. So then things don't happen. So then people don't know how to make the change, right? And so when you have something like this, like the No Justice, No Peace resolution, or the Black Excellence resolution, or whatever other resolution you have, it forces people to think, to interject a shift. It forces people to think of that shift in a new way. It's like, okay, well, it happened, and we're so glad that these students advocated for this. We're so glad that the staff advocated for this thing, and we don't have the excuse anymore to say like, well, we don't know how to engage in this process, so we're just not going to do it. So like the Black Excellence Resolution, like the No Justice, No Peace Resolution, it forces everyone to have to like make a decision. It forces everyone to have to do something about it, and it takes away all the excuses. And so that's what I'm so pumped to be, to have been involved in the No Justice, No Peace, and the Black Excellence Resolution that had started before I started, because it's like, you know what, great, let's deal with it. Like we don't have the choice to not engage in this work anymore. So let's get out there, let's get messy, let's figure out, let's build relationships, let's recognize that we are for sure going to fumble, we are for sure not going to do it right on the onset, but we have a goal, we have something in mind, and that's what we're working toward. I realized at the beginning of the story, I started mixing my Black Excellence resolutions and my No Justice, No Peace resolutions. The Black Excellence resolution started before I got here. No Justice, No Peace resolution definitely was a part of sort of helping you all organize that on the back end. So just to be clear, but again, it forces our hand. So proud that you all have been the impetus to that motivation, when for years and years and years, we've allowed so many excuses to prevent us from working. It comes from the students to say, no, you don't have a choice anymore. Get out there and figure it out. So that really pumps me up.
I echo both Jamie and Joey. Excited, definitely long overdue. But unfortunately, the resolution's request for, historically marginalized communities have continued to have been made over decades, and no answers have really been provided that really provide an adequate response to those demands. And so I was reminded of a quote written by John Henrik Clark that my African American history professor shared with me when I took African American history back in college, and I got to make sure I don't get it messed up. But he says, history is not everything, but it is a starting point. History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is a compass that they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells them where they are, but most importantly, where they must be. And for me, the No Justice, No Peace resolution builds on some of the work of our department, but to go further and advance our work to ensure that our students know where they have been and where they still must go. And so for the No Justice, No Peace resolution, my initial thoughts continue to be that sometimes you do need to have a line in the sand in terms of what does it mean to achieve racial equity for our students. And for too long, while we have made progress in certain areas, people who have been at the table have not always looked like the folks on this call today. And so I think it was really important to have a group of students alongside with your leadership team at DMLK and our team who look like us, be able to share what we expect to see as a result of ensuring that we have culturally sustaining curriculum and instruction for our Black and Brown students, rather than have others other us and tell us what we need to have culturally sustaining curriculum and instruction.
Honestly, what all of you said is like really interesting. And I think one common theme I picked up from all of you is that like you had the position you have right now in DPS, you noticed that there was a lack of equity and a lack of racial just focus within your schools. And I feel like that's really important because everything we're working on, especially as students, like it's one thing to know something and then like just wait for it to happen. I'm glad that you guys have taken like such a foothold and wanting to be involved in this because like since the beginning, since I've been here, since before the resolution was passed, the Black Excellence and the No Justice, No Peace resolution was passed, there have been a lot of areas for growth in DPS. And speaking on that, before the resolution was proposed and passed, in each of your opinions, what areas in DPS were, I guess, had opportunities for growth?
I think as an opportunity for growth for the district, it's really just acknowledging that this institution is not built historically to support the needs of the communities of color. And I think, as a point of frustration, that numbers can come through year after year after year that show our Black and our Brown students are getting whatever sort of disproportionately lower score than their white peers. And I don't always, I had a woman in a training recently say like, why are we always measuring everything against white people? Why can't we have our own measures? So like, I want to honor that. And the other end of it, which is like, it's true that our white students, according to the measures that we have in place now, our white students are just doing better than our Black and our brown students. And it was really unsettling to me that that can happen year after year after year. And I don't want to imply that people weren't doing, work to get us there. I know lots of our colleagues have been fighting for equity for many, many years, but to have these numbers continue, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's very frustrating to me. I wonder how I participate in those numbers continuing in the ways that they were. I have to implicate myself in that process. And so I think, in that last year of teaching, when I was so frustrated, I started to finally recognize that a lot of what was happening around me was because of race, was because of family background, community background. And then that really made me upset. Like, why the heck is this happening to these kinds of students and in this way? And why is this not happening to students in other parts of town or to white students? I just had all these really critical questions of it. So now to come back and to participate with the district to say like, okay, how can we step back? How can we start to recognize that these things are explicitly because of race? These things are explicitly because of the history and the institutions that were designed to support some and not support others. How can we redo those institutions? How can we undo those institutions to make them better represent the communities that we hope that they're serving, to help them better represent the needs of the students who have historically been underserved? So that frustration and that tension is really kind of where I want to sit in the work that I do, and like sit in those and ask those really critical questions. Like, why does this happen? What is the Black Excellence Resolution really going to do for Black students? What is the No Justice, No Peace resolution really going to do on the ground for students and families and communities? Because because of those resolutions, having the opportunity to ask those questions and engage really intentionally about race, really intentionally about community, that to me is, what I had been frustrated by and what I was thinking a lot about before those resolutions happened. And now that they're happening, it's like, great, let's target these very specific questions. Let's be really, really intentional. Let's talk about race. Let's have really uncomfortable conversations about race. And then that gives us the opportunity to heal and explore from the racialized perspective that we all know has been the main difference for why our white students were succeeding and our Black and our brown students weren't. So that's kind of what I sit with.
In alignment with that, I think before the resolution was passed, maybe in pockets we were reckoning and acknowledging with racism, interpersonal, organizationally, again, in pockets, but not as a district. Were we really being open and honest with the uncomfortable truth that racism is alive and well within our own district, within our four walls? And I think with the passing of the resolution, it requires people to not ignore it anymore, to not ignore the uncomfortable truth that we have to do better. And I think before that, we sort of knew it, but we didn't have anybody challenging us to change the status quo and to change the system. And so I think that was before we had a lot of opportunity to grow in terms of naming it, being uncomfortable with it, sitting in it, and then doing something about it.
Yeah, I don't know how much I can add on to what Jamie and Joey both shared. I think one area of growth that this resolution has provided us is the need to have tighter and greater feedback loops with the users that we serve, so that the work that we create is not in isolation of our students, educators, and community. And I say that not to dismiss work that has happened in the past, because I know that there has been, to an extent, collaboration with various stakeholders, but to have that intentional focus on racial equity, I think is truly important to be able to advance this work. And if I can, I would flip the question and say that DPS needs to be a leader in this area. I think too often we focus in on what are other districts doing, and have found that we are either ahead of or folks are at the same place that we're in. And our students have amplified their voices time and time again, as well as our families and schools, to share what we need to do. And so now it's the time to lead. And so I think our biggest area for growth is not to become paralyzed by, um, what are the models that exist for us to be able to engage in this work, but rather, what do we need to do as a district to create the conditions and circumstances for racial equity not to be an afterthought, but the table in which we sit at to advance culturally sustaining practices and ensure that our students see themselves in the curriculum and we engage in the hard but necessary conversations where students can understand their identity, where they've been, why they've been in these spaces, and where we must go to continuously disrupt powers and systems of privilege, and yeah, of privilege.
I 100% agree with everything that you guys just said, and I think I can't add anything onto that. But I also just like to ask, regarding all of the areas of, or I guess the opportunities for growth in DPS that you all have said, do you foresee the No Justice, No Peace resolution as a means to help improve these areas? And once again, I'd appreciate hearing from all of you.
I do. I think the four areas to Joey's point earlier around one thing that prevents change from happening is, actually starting. And so the No Justice, No Peace resolution has given us four areas as a foundation to begin this work. By no means is this an ends to a means. This is just a starting point. It doesn't capture every piece of the work, but it does capture the necessary components for us to be able to engage authentically in this work. So the focus areas around developing consistent processes for revisions and professional learning for our educators, and taking a deep look at our current curriculum and engaging in audits, both internally and externally, are the right and first necessary steps that we have to take to become a district where equity is truly our core identity. Um, and I would say that, to ensure that we are improving in these areas, it will force us to be transparent about the work that we are engaging in each of those areas. So no one should wonder what we're doing when it comes to audits. We need to be transparent with all of our stakeholders to be able to engage in that work collectively. So absolutely, this resolution has provided us with just a foundation for how we engage and level set what the work is, what we are requiring from our district personnel, from our educators in the work. And I would hope that as part of this resolution for us to be able to continuously unpack what are the other systems that are in play that still need to be disrupted, for us to be able to tackle and engage in this work even more deeply.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is such a great foundation, as Theo mentioned, for beginning the work. Because DPS has been really, because of students like you, let me first say, DPS has been pushed to be one of the first districts really thinking intentionally about race in the explicit ways. I'm pointing to my other screen. I have the Black Excellence, or the No Justice, No Peace resolution up now, and I'm kind of looking through it, and I know that, not to give ourselves too many compliments, because this should have been done 50 years ago, and even longer, as my colleagues have mentioned. But with this document that I have here in front of me, just thinking about like developing consistent processes, engaging in feedback loops, internal and external curriculum review, these are such explicit, intentional ways that we can begin to do the work that other districts haven't even begun to think about. And that is both really exciting, and also it creates a sense that is, I'm not afraid of it. I think this is really important and necessary work. And we don't have any measures to sort of like track ourselves against. So is this the best way? We don't know yet. But is this a really solid, clear, foundational way that we can move forward? Absolutely. And I think that's the most exciting thing. We have a document here. We have something on paper that gives us at least somewhat of a roadmap to begin thinking about these things in ways that we know are going to be better than how they've been in the past. I hope to see many iterations of this. I hope as we continue to learn and grow that we'll have No Justice, No Peace 2.0, 3.0, because as we know better, hopefully, we continue to do better. And this document, as Theo mentioned, might reveal some other shortcomings that we hadn't foreseen. And so then how are we going to address that? It's going to continue to reiterate for us as we continue to grow and learn in our process, how to improve, how we can be really explicit, how maybe this doesn't touch on every single thing that we needed to. And so how are we building for ourselves the capacity to grow and expand along with our knowledge, so that the institution continues to change. So that's what I hope to see, that this is definitely foundational, and we will see how it helps us build out the dreams that we hope it is going to build out for us.
Absolutely foundational to continue to know better, do better. And I think what it's really highlighted for me is adults find a lot of reasons to not be able to do the work. There's many things that we allow to get in our way. And what you all have laid out here and proven to us is we just have to do the work. There's some very clear things on here of us just doing the work, engaging in feedback loops. There's some very specific dates in here and timelines. And I'm really excited about the professional learning for educators. So it's not just a here, go do this, but here's how to do it, right? And here's what you need to be considering as you roll out this curriculum, considering your own identities and what that means for you as an educator. And so I think this is absolutely setting us on a path of incredible change that needs to happen.
I was so excited to read the vision of the CSCI department, and I actually have your vision listed here, but I think our listeners would appreciate hearing your vision from your visions department from you guys. So would you mind reading it to us?
So just for some context, this vision statement was born out of me moving into the position to take over the CSCI department. And so I'll read through it as quickly as I can and be respectful of time. Teaching and learning are the heart and soul of education. Students are relying on us to represent, serve, and embrace all of the intersectionalities of their identity. While this is not a new concept, our education system has not been equitable and inclusive for all communities and all people. An invisible man, Ralph Ellison, confesses, "I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you sometimes see in circus sideshows, it is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me." Please sit with that statement for a second. Let's call it how it is. I have experienced it firsthand. As a Black male, I have always recognized the importance and necessity of a quality education to thrive and achieve both my professional and personal goals, even in spite of my education experiences in the South. During the 1950s and 60s in the South, my parents were denied access to opportunities and were provided inequitable resources throughout their schooling. Even though I was able to achieve success in spite of my K-12 experiences, I have become conditioned to submit systematic oppression and injustice and made to feel that being uncomfortable is the norm. I want to be seen for who I am. Our Black, Latino, Native American students must be seen and valued for who they are. This has been and continues to be my reality. We must recognize that we have a long way to go, yet we have both the moral and ethical obligation to change the experience I had for our Black, Indigenous, and Latino students in truly meaningful ways. We, our team, have the power and talent to change this reality for all students in DPS. I want this for myself as a Black man and for all marginalized communities. We can lead this work stronger together. As a team working together, we can and will disrupt and deconstruct systematic racism. We can make the difference for the students who feel invisible, like I did, who need our unrelenting support to achieve their full potential. In Susanna's entry plan, she shared with her a powerful message for Team DPS that every single one of our students thrives not by accident, but by design. As a Black educator, Susanna's vision is powerful and means everything to me. It fills my cup and serves as my North Star because my success was not by design. It was by accident. We must ask ourselves, how do we protect each of our Black, Latino, and Native American students from the deeply embedded racist practices that have prevented so many of our students of color from getting access to the education they need and deserve? Now is the time, together, to guarantee that every single one of our students Our Black, Native American, and Latino students thrive not by accident, but by design. A humanizing, culturally sustaining curriculum seeks to perpetuate and foster and sustain linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of the schooling for positive social transformation. It decenters whiteness and brings in marginalized communities from the margins to the center of everything that we do. My vision for the culturally sustaining curriculum and instruction team is that our Black, Latino, and Native American students will see themselves in the curriculum, that our Black, Latino, and Native American students will learn about their history and the history of their communities. We will honor our Black, Native American, and Latino students and their families by acknowledging their contributions past and present. We will help our students, all students, see how their contributions are essential to our community, to our nation, and to our world. We will help teachers create a space for learning and growing in their profession, and we will hold the necessary, difficult conversations together. Um, I want you to know that I will support you, and this is for the team when I entered into the position, on this journey as a team. And as shared by the late Honorable John Lewis, our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And then I guess the final part for Joey doesn't get on me is that I look forward to making some noise and getting in the good trouble, necessary trouble on behalf of our Black, Latino, and Native American students in DPS.
I don't want to speak for everyone, but I love hearing that again, and I love hearing it from you. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for letting me push you.
You're good, Joey. Thank you.
And I was literally just about to say that because I feel like you guys' statement literally encompasses everything that we're all so passionate about. And it mentions all of the things that we've been looking for and all of the things that we didn't even know we were looking for but wanted in our education. And I also feel like that statement fits really well with our resolution. And I want to ask you guys, how do each of you believe the resolution can help fulfill this vision statement?
Wow, that's a good question. Um, I believe that the No Justice, No Peace resolution will help fulfill the vision statement for the culturally sustaining curriculum and instruction department, um, because it implicates us, the adults, and it will ensure um, that we do everything that I've outlined in my vision. I think to Jamie's point, for too long, there's always something that can get in the way of progress, whether we have the time or the resources. And at the end of the day, we will never have the time or all of the resources that we'll need to be able to systematically break down um, historical racism. But we have to begin to take the steps to actively disrupt it, because if not, the cycle will be a vicious cycle that will continue. And so I think that the resolution does a good job at implicating the adults who in practice either implicitly or explicitly carry out these practices by being able to examine our own biases and how it shows up in our work, and taking the steps to ensure that we're providing a culturally sustaining curriculum that really does question, why do we center on the European perspective? You know, why is it that our students can go 12 years without being able to see themselves, not just in tragedy, but also in celebration and joy of the contributions that their ancestors and present day continue to contribute to our community and to our world? And so I think that this resolution does an excellent job of being able to hold us accountable to the work and say that the work is possible. It just requires certain folks, or the adults who are responsible for teaching and learning, to shift practices, abandon old habits, and really deconstruct and reconstruct how we engage in teaching and learning with racial equity at the core.
I think they are very much in alignment. And one statement from the resolution, whereas the board recognizes that Black and African American, Indigenous, and Latino lives and contributions must be infused in all courses and not exclusive to social studies. As Theo said, this holds us accountable. On the bottom of the page, it says over the next 2 years. And so I think that is one of the biggest ways that this resolution will support CSCI work, is that we're on a timeline. We need to get to action and get to work. Some of you, as we named when we first said this or got on this call, are graduating. Yay! And going on to next chapters. And it's sad that you won't be able to see some of the fruits of your labor, but this does put us on a timeline. So students who are in 8th grade will have a very different experience when they get to 10th grade, if we follow through with everything that's been laid for us.
And I want to stamp everything that my colleagues have said. Thanks, Theo and Jamie, and also add what you just mentioned, Janelle, about, this is for, never have we been tasked to work so specifically for students and for all of our students. And so to hear you say, it really highlights for you the things that you hope for your own education and the things you didn't even know to hope for in your education. For me, that's what motivates me with this work. This is giving space to finally get into all the really deep kind of hidden corners of an education, so that, while our white brothers and sisters have been able to see themselves in really nuanced and really specific ways and across gender expressions and across identities, we're only just beginning to allow our students of color to be able to see themselves in such a similar way. So to hear you say, like, this is for a vision I didn't even know that I had, that is like, yes, let's continue to work for that. Let's continue to go so that every single student can see themselves in all of the really specific and really nuanced ways, in ways they don't even know about themselves yet, because that's what education is. It's helping students to create a vision for themselves, to find their truest self, to uncover all of these dark corners, to be enlightened by our foreparents who came before us. And now this is tasking us to really uncover those for our students, to share them with our students, to help, all for the purposes of our students to see themselves and all of their uniqueness and all of their importance, so that they can go out into the world and become whatever the heck they want to become, realizing that they are sort of like on the shoulders of the people who have done this before them. So super, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for offering that perspective.
Honestly, thank you all for just like going that in depth with everything. Like, once again, I don't think I can really add anything else, because just like your perspectives, we value them so much, and just seeing how much work and commitment you've put into the resolution, and clearly how seriously you take your positions in DPS and taking accountability for what we learn and our curriculum and our students. It's really inspiring, especially knowing that the work we're doing isn't just going to end when we all graduate, but it's going to be continually happening as long as there are people like you in strong positions. And it's just really good to know that we have that kind of assurance going forward. And especially as we have this conversation, I know that we all agree that now's the time together to guarantee that every single one of our students, our BIPOC students, thrives not by design. I mean, not by accident, but by design. And I guess I just firstly want to hear from you, Mr. Shaw, and then Ms. Vera or Mr. Torres, you can add in after. And I just want to ask you, Mr. Shaw, as the CSDI director, at which point does your position influence the other instructional departments?
Ooh, these are really good questions. Man. I think that my position allows me to influence the other departments within CSCI by really creating that environment where we really do truly have interdependence amongst all of our work. And it's just, it's accountability to ensure that the work happens. And I don't think accountability is a negative word. Accountability ensures that we can deliver on the commitments that we have outlined in my vision, but also in the No Justice, No Peace resolution. I think is bringing in, as I shared earlier, I don't claim to know everything, but being able to leverage our resources in a way so that we can collectively engage in this work together, be a learning organization, and create the systems and structures so that we can be able to engage in this work. Any challenge that we have shouldn't be an obstacle, but it should be met as an opportunity to address an age-old challenge that we have allowed to go neglected because we were either too scared or too fearful to do anything about it. And as I sit here with you all today and have seen the work that you all have engaged in with the countless interviews, that you all have participated in. And I know both the good and bad responses that you may have gotten from folks that you engaged in this work. As young teenagers, there's absolutely no reason for why I can't step into the public arena alongside you and be a support and a leader within this work to ensure that we are truly partnered in this work together. Um, and so for me, I would just say that my influence is to what you just spoke to earlier, being in this position to ensure that our actions align with our words, that we walk our talk. Talk is not enough. Talk is not going to be the only thing that this department does. It will be engaging in the authentic inclusion of BIPOC voices within our curriculum in all facets that it means that's outlined by the resolution and also by things that we'll uncover as a result of the resolution. And I'm confident with the ongoing feedback loops that we have with you, with Kimberly Grayson and the phenomenal team at DMLK, and with other schools that we will engage in, that we will continue to do this. So I guess, all that to say, as long as I'm in this position, this work will always serve as my North Star, and what I will lead every conversation with to ensure that this isn't an afterthought, but this is part of the core design and everything that we do in CSCI.
I'll say with my position, we all, Jamie, Theo, and I, sort of, we represent a very broad level of institutional authority. And so for me, I don't have a ton of institutional authority in the way that Theo does. And I think that doesn't let me off the hook, right? So I think that that's something very important that I think is that you all have reflected to us as like students. Everything's focused on students. How are we going to change students? How are we going to be there for students? And here we are literally sitting on a talk for an hour because of the work that you all have done. And I think that's how I like to think of myself, is for those of us who don't have a ton of institutional authority, quote unquote, we have lots of space to participate in the institution and to still change it, right? Because we have important views, we have ways that we look at the world, that matters. And so for me, I have to go in, and while I don't have necessarily the opportunity to make a big, broad, sweeping change, I can go into lots of different rooms and build lots of relationships and really learn how to engage with folks in a way that is, in a way that forces me to be a community organizer and a community builder in ways that maybe my colleagues don't always have to do or don't have the luxury of time to do because they're busy with lots of other time commitments and things like that. So in my unique position, I'm able to be in relationship with folks, to be able to create really interpersonal change. And then through those changes, that's how we begin to deconstruct the work that each of us does. I might have the CRE lens and they might have the content lens for the whatever particular subject matter. But through our relationship, we have potentially an opportunity to grow how we each think of the other person's work. And then that is sort of like a little spark, a little chispa that continues to light that fire across the district, so that you have this top, people at the very top making all these big institutional changes, and then people sort of in the middle that are influencing in all the ways that they can influence. And, if everyone's doing that toward racial equity, then we have a really great opportunity to make change across the whole system.
I just really quick, one thing you mentioned, Mr. Torres, of having influence and bringing that influence into like the community and being able to work directly with students as a means of um, creating change. I feel like that's just one really important thing, because a lot of people don't look at it like that, and they don't think that the little things are also making changes, and being able to just focus in on communities and talk to kids and just hearing and listening to them, I feel like is so important. And I believe that teaching and learning are the heart and soul of education. And students are relying on you all to represent, serve, and embrace all of the intersectionalities of their identity. We all know that this is not a new concept, but our education system obviously has not been equitable and inclusive for all communities and people. And so, with this in mind, I know Theo, Miss Grayson had given you a copy of the Black History 365 textbook a couple weeks ago. And I guess I just want to ask you, like, what are your initial thoughts of the curriculum?
Yes, I was fortunate enough to get a copy from Kimberly Grayson, and I shared with her, as I'll share with you today, that it was really great to see a textbook where the contributions of African American pioneers and change agents were not footnotes and would have been considered other American textbooks. So it was really good to see just a rich description provided, authentic primary sources incorporated for us to be able to get a full picture of, where do we come from? How do we get to this place? And just the relevancy that students are able to see and make those connections to current events today.
Have you been able to share the textbook with anyone else in your department?
I've not been able to share the actual textbook. I have shared with members on this call the resource itself. Social distancing has provided somewhat of a challenge, but I do know that the folks on this call will be engaging in some professional learning with the authors of this text in the coming weeks to dig in a little bit further, as well as some other folks in our division. So our deputy superintendent and associate chief will be attending. Our director of social studies and some other integral members of our team will be attending some professional learning by the authors.
So, just to build off of that, because we're also very, very excited about collaborating with the authors of Black History 365. And just once again, it's good to know that other people are looking into them because we believe that they'll be able to play a really big part in our resolution moving forward. And as prioritized in both our resolution and the CSCI vision statement, we want Black, Indigenous, and people of color to have representation in their history. And right now, we're pushing to get the BH65 textbook adopted in all schools and curriculums. We're aware that several people think that because we start with a focus on Black history, we're only focused on Black history. And as we said before, you have to make sure that you're good within your own history and education before you can even try to help others effectively. Just, you can't really build greatness on a weak foundation. And we focused on Black history first because you have to help yourself before you can help others. And we just hope that more students will be able to stand up and advocate for the history as well with, I guess, the space that we've opened up where like they know that the district will listen to their voice if they fight hard enough for it and they make it clear that they're not going to back down at just a simple ask. Just off the bat, learning your own history shouldn't be as hard as it was for us, let alone advocating for it. And we know that to have a truly equitable history education, you have to have as many perspectives as possible. And starting with the focus on Black history is just
Um, I feel like that's a really great point, Kalia. And over the course of my education, we've always only had one history curriculum or textbook per grade. And that one textbook did not encompass all American history. It only told the story from the white point of view. And our Black, Indigenous, and students of color must see themselves in the curriculum. Our Black, Indigenous, and students of color must learn about their history and the history of their communities. So, for you all, I want to ask you guys why you think it's important that we note that one curriculum cannot encompass all BIPOC history, but the adoption of the BH365 curriculum is a start and a catalyst for other curriculum adoptions.
Hmm. Good question. And I completely agree with that sentiment around one curriculum cannot encompass all the history of any people. Um, I think, this is a multifaceted question right here. I think first and foremost, when we talk about history, it's never been written for the perspective of BIPOC communities. It's always been written against a European norm. And when you think about U.S. history, it's oftentimes taught through an American exceptionalism lens, which inherently doesn't allow you to engage in some of the hard history and ugly history of our past. And I think more importantly, the richness of what makes the United States great is that we are a diverse country of diverse people. And so you have to be able to pull in primary sources from different places to be able to get the full history, because every story is written from one person's perspective. And in order to get the complete history, which, is just one person's perspective, you need to be able to dig in and dive into more stories in order to be able to tell that complete picture. And so when I think about my own experience in undergrad as a history major, just the nervousness of seeing the syllabus with like the 10 books that are listed that you had to read for a semester, and none of them were a textbook. They were primary sources written by folks of that time period. And then it was our job to construct what was the history of that time period. And I think that's a more authentic way to be able to engage in history. And it's also how historians do their job. They paint the picture based on the artifacts and primary sources and letters of that time, which provide for a richness and an authenticity rather than having one person kind of sum up in a textbook. Here's the brief page that you can get on the civil rights movement if that's what you're looking for, when it's so more multifaceted with so many more leaders than Rosa Parks and Dr. King involved in that movement. They're at the front line, but definitely not in the backdrop of history that are instrumental in being able to advance social change.
Yeah, human beings are not a monolith. We don't have all one same lived experience. And so it's silly of us to think that we can learn about the rich diversity of the human experience in one textbook.
And as Jamie always says, this is not a zero-sum game. Like, you can learn about lots of different kinds of histories, lots of different people's histories, and they don't have to cancel each other out, right? You can just be. It's so funny that when we talk about history, this happens where, if this was math, you would be celebrated and rewarded for learning a lot of different kinds of math. But when it comes to history, when it comes to the people, when it comes to like knowing different kinds of people, especially people that don't benefit from a white European dominant lens, it becomes a deficit somehow. I don't understand that. And so for me, it's like, yes, let's learn every single group's history that we can, not just to honor that group, which it does, but also to enrich ourselves, to learn about our local, sort of like the thing that makes our local place so important and so unique. Let's learn everything we can about that so that we can just be, the best, most learned people we can be as well. Yes, again, it honors the people whose history is being told, and it improves us to be able to gain a perspective that we didn't have before we knew that history. So learn it all. Let's start with Black history and let's keep going. I think that that's a really, as Jamie said, a really silly frame that people offer, that they cancel each other out. They absolutely do not.
I 100% agree with everything that you guys just said, especially like considering like what you just said, Mr. Torres, about how like most people are celebrated for learning multiple types of math, but then when it comes to history, it's like it's almost seems like there's a certain limit you can't, where it's like 50% traditional American history and then like maybe from a bunch of different countries, but then that's it. Like that's ridiculous to limit the knowledge that you want your students to learn, because at the end of the day, there's no negative to learning as much as you can, especially about other people that are in the world that you interact with. Like, there's no probable reason to try to limit how much somebody can learn when it comes to the races that they may encounter on a daily basis. So I definitely agree with what you just pointed out. And just to move forward a bit, Mr. Shaw, as the director of the CSCI department, how do you advise we get the district to expedite the adoption of the Black History 365 curriculum so that all teachers will be able to attend mandatory professional development this summer and ensure that they have enough time to plan and prepare for the material for this upcoming school year?
Yes, I think it starts with advocacy, which you all have done a phenomenal job of doing alongside with Kimberly Grayson and DMLK. So I think the first step is bringing the awareness of the curriculum to our team, and then engaging us alongside the DMLK team in a couple of weeks around the Black History 365 professional learning. And then from there, one of the pieces that we have took upon ourselves to ensure that we continuously keep you and your team updated on the work is we're meeting with Kimberly Grayson bi-weekly um, to be able to just discuss where the current works are and where we are in some of those different areas. And so I know that this is one piece that she has brought forward to our attention. And after we go through the professional learning in a couple of weeks, we'll go from there to see if and how we can advance this through our adoption process for a curriculum and see how we can have it integrated within our suite of resources, in particular for social studies.
So, I would like to ask, what expectations do you all have of current DPS employees that are directly and indirectly in charge of carrying out the resolution?
One expectation that I would have for folks who are engaged in any way with the resolution is to have a mindset that is focused on solutions oriented. I think too often we get stuck in this place of what we can't do or what will be a challenge that we'll have to overcome. Those are just going to be natural to the process. So it will be my expectation that with any challenge that we're presented by, what are the solutions that we can engage in to ensure that we deliver in each and every single last one of those buckets that are centered around no justice and no peace, um, to make sure that there's nothing that's going to get in the way of us stalling the progress of the resolution. So for me, it's really going to be focusing on the visioning and having that growth mindset around any obstacle that stands in our way. There is a way around it, and not to get bogged down with what we can't do, but how are we going to go about finding the right solution to address it and holding people accountable to doing so.
I think in that same spirit, it's socializing it, right? Like making sure that everyone knows that it exists, making sure that everyone knows that there is what Theo was mentioning and some accountability, making sure everyone knows that they have a role and a place in the no justice, no peace resolution, and then getting out there and doing the work, just being with folks as they learn it themselves, being with folks as we begin to do the really specific content-based things that we'll do, like curriculum adoption, and like Theo's mentioned, building those community relationships, tapping into the community relationships that are already there, and really just making sure that it's kind of like that it's living, right? That it's moving from this paper and moving from theory into action.
I think for me, quickly, expectations that I have for DPS employees, including myself, is to continue to listen to students, to community, to colleagues, to continue to learn and lead. Listen, learn, and lead are my 3 L's that I'm working to hold myself accountable to, as well as colleagues.
I love that you said that, being able to listen and then learn from what you heard and lead based off of that. I feel like that's a very, 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 what's the word? Thorough like process of being able to lead students and make progress within the district. And I also want to ask you guys what steps each of you will take in the CSCI department by the end of the school year to guarantee more of a culturally responsive education within all content areas, to ensure that every teacher has the resources that they need to support DPS students. And in addition to that, what are your plans for the last 6 months of this academic school year, this summer, and the upcoming school year?
I do want Jamie to share her plan for professional learning, but one of the commitments that I am making to ensure that by the end of the year that our team has more culturally responsive education in all areas is to ensure that our teams, as they work on their plans to really be able to actualize the resolution in the next school year, really begin to identify what are those short and long-term areas where we can begin to see immediate impact. There are some small things that we can do to ensure that our students have more representation within the curriculum as soon as the next start of the school year. And so really making sure that we identify what are those small wins that we can move with quickly, and then also begin to think through what are the long-term areas that will take more time. Because I think we can also fall into the trap of everything will take 2 years, whereas there are some things that we can take that will be able to get into place for August 2021. In the next 6 months, it'll be my expectation that all departments have plans for how we will engage in the resolution, but also to ensure that it is deeply connected to the overall department. So it's really important for me that there's coherence across what all departments are doing, and that each department is not doing their own thing in service of the resolution, but that we're collectively driving towards one vision for what it means to have culturally sustaining curriculum across each and every content area in CSCI. Also within the next 6 months, we'll be doing the external curriculum audits for our social studies curriculum to ensure that they're looked at from outsiders from the Black History consultation from the University of Missouri, to really ensure that our 8th, 10th, and civics curriculum for high school are vetted through a Black lens, a Native American lens, Asian American lens, LGBTQ lens, to really make sure that we're able to ensure that there's full representation throughout our content areas, and also help us in developing a framework that can be used across all content areas. And as what you'll hear later from some of our directors, we've already begun working on how do we revise some of our text, such as To Kill a Mockingbird, to be taught through the Black experience and not through white experiences, such as Atticus Finch in that text. So those are just some of the steps that we're taking to be able to actualize some of the curriculum work, as well as working with other schools around feedback loops to ensure that we have strong representation for our Native American communities and Latino communities at both West and Abraham Lincoln High School as well.
Personally, I hope to continue to learn, listen, learn, and lead. And through that, a couple specific things here in the spring, we are hoping to provide about over 100 educators an opportunity to engage in a culturally responsive education learning cohort this spring that's really focused on classroom and supporting educators in the classroom and shifting moves in the classroom to support our students, particularly our Black, Indigenous, and students of color. Simultaneously, we are working really hard to build the capacity of people across the district and continuing to implicate adults and move beyond calling in the CRE team or the equity team, as Theo mentioned earlier, for the stamp of approval, but supporting all adults to build their own capacity to advance this work. And then for really next year, in the next 6 months, we are getting ready to launch our CRE intensive, where educators across the district will be able to engage in culturally responsive learning throughout the year, inclusive of, really a 360 approach is what we're hoping to build, that it's inclusive of the No Justice, No Peace resolution and those components, inclusive of social and emotional learning, inclusive of reckoning with your biases and how that's showing up and impacting students in your classroom. So quite a few things we're working on to launch here coming up in the next few days, as well as preparing for next year to advance the work for you all and for other Black, Indigenous students of color across the district.
My role is shifting a little bit. So I will just say that I will do my best to support Jamie and Theo as we roll out all of the initiatives that they mentioned.
Thank you all. So far, this podcast has definitely been really insightful. I know for me personally. And I guess just one final question would be, if you have any, what advice would you give all of us to ensure that we are holding DPS accountable in carrying out this work?
I would say continue to amplify your voice. You all have this platform to be able to not only share your truth, but also hold us accountable to what is the current work that we're doing in relation to No Justice, No Peace. As long as I am serving as the leader of this department, it is my goal and my intent that we make sure that you're part of those feedback loops to know what the work we do is. It's not enough that you have a resolution and these are the 4 buckets. It's important that we share some of that accountability with you to be able to report out what's the work that we're engaging in. Is this the right step? What pieces are we missing? Can you catch some of our biases and hidden spots to engage in this work? So I would just say to continue to amplify your voice in this platform and in many other platforms, to hold DPS and especially my feet to the fire to make sure that we're actually doing the work that's outlined in this resolution.
I'll offer just, you all are so empowered and are such leaders, I imagine, among your school and among your colleagues, is just to continue to bring your I said colleagues, your peers and you work there. So I want to encourage you all to continue to bring your peers in with you and try to rally as many young people into this experience of being a student leader as you can, because not only are you all making really amazing change across the district and in your sort of corners of influence, I also think just having a leadership experience like the one you all are experiencing is going to really shape how you view the next however many years of your secondary, post high school lives. And it's just a really invaluable process to get to live into being a student leader. I worked in student leadership for many, many years and I care very much about it. So I'm looking to you all to say, like, what really lit the fire inside of you, and how can you teach your friends and those around you to find that same fire within them for the things they're passionate about, to go out and create influence and change in those corners of the world too. Because to be able to bring this identity work into everything, we're talking about education, but to bring identity work into lots of different kind of areas of life, it's so important. And so just continue to bring other people into this calling with you, because it's life changing, it's life saving even. So that's my advice, or my challenge.
I think we should be asking you all this question. What do we need to be doing to hold ourselves accountable? Because you all have done more in a short amount of time than many of us can say. And so keep doing what you're doing, and continue to be bold and unapologetic in your quest for educational equity.
Just thank you, honestly, Mr. Shaw, Ms. Villarreal-Bassett, and Mr. Torres. We're so honored to have you guys on here, and we truly do appreciate the time that you took out of your day to come talk to us. And we're also just extremely grateful for your willingness and level of collaboration with TMOK and our principal, Kimberly Grace. And just thank you again for coming on this podcast today, for your continuous support, and just making sure that our resolution doesn't get lost in all of the chaos going on right now.
Thank you all for your leadership.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you again for inviting us, and please let us know if there's anything that you need for us, not only to advance the resolution, but anything that you need in the coming months as you all close out the school year and move on to bigger and brighter things.
Thank you all.
On today's episode, we discussed the CSCI's department vision of Black, Indigenous, and students of color will see themselves in the curriculum, will learn about their history and the history of their communities, and will be honored by acknowledging their contributions past and present. We also learned that the CSCI department will help all students see how their contributions are essential to our community, our nation, and our world. They will help teachers create a space for learning and growing in their profession and hold necessary, difficult conversations together. We also discussed how the department's plans to bring this vision to life, utilizing our resolution as an accompanying piece. As shared by the late great Honorable John Lewis, our struggle is not the struggle of a day, week, month, or year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Our call to action is for all of you to never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. For some time now, but these two quotes from Representative John Lewis strongly resonate with us, because in the beginning of our movement, it felt like we were prepared to shake things up and ultimately get into some good and necessary trouble. The issue here is, why did it feel like we were causing trouble by fighting for our history? As students in DPS, were we not already entitled to a thorough and bountiful experience within our own Black history education, equal to that of our white counterparts? Why has our district been using the tagline of equity is our identity, when up until last year we had no equity within something as simple as what we learned in a history class? This is not a new concept, and our education system has not been and is not equitable and inclusive for all communities and all people. As Gutierrez and Rice Booth stated in 202, we must ask ourselves, how will we protect each of our Black, Indigenous, students of color from the deeply embedded racist practices that prevented so many Black, Indigenous, and students of color from getting access to the education they need and deserve? Now is the time to guarantee that every single student, Black, Indigenous, and color, thrive not by accident, but by design. We need to hold DPS accountable to break the historical patterns of inequity that exist within this district. At this point, our hard work, efforts, resolution, time will be wasted if we assume that putting a textbook in our schools and hoping the teachers will teach it right is enough. In addition to this, we would like all of you to write a letter to the school board requesting the full district adoption of Black History 365, using the template that we have provided in the chat. We can't emphasize enough that everyone can benefit from learning about everyone's culture. It is time for us to know ourselves, where we come from, and our struggles. Our history matters, our history is real, and deserves to be taught and acknowledged.
Black is